Welcome to Boring Topics. Despite their alliance to defeat the Axis powers, the Soviet Union and the United States relationship quickly turned sour after World War II. The rival ideologies of communism and capitalism were incompatible, and the rubble in Japan-Germany had not long cooled before the two powers began to face off. An iron curtain descended across Europe, and most of the globe found itself aligning with one of the two superpowers. While a direct conflict between the two superpowers did not occur, throughout the Cold War, there were numerous local conflicts that were used as proxy wars between the two. The first of these was the Korean War, which raged from 1950 to 1953. In it, the North Koreans were supported directly by Chinese troops and also by Soviet advisors and material, while the South Koreans were supported mostly by the United States and other allies. However, in the air war, Soviet pilots actually faced off against American pilots. In addition, the Soviets trained Chinese and North Korean pilots who also fought against the Americans. The air war in Korea was different than World War II, as the communists were almost entirely on the defensive. They used their fighter bases in China to try to disrupt the American bombing of North Korea. The communists rarely attempted to bomb Allied targets, and the one notable case, an attack on a radar installation on an island, ended in disaster for the communists. The Allied pilots had to deal with long flights against an enemy that had advanced radar warning and had the defensive advantage. In general, Allied pilots were not supposed to cross the Yalu River into China, but as the war progressed, the hot pursuit exception was stretched as American pilots became more aggressive. However, true strategic bombing and anti-airfield operations were not permitted, as it would have expanded the war into China. This was a direct contrast to World War II, where the Allies had the choice of any target they wanted to bomb. In short, the Korean Air War was limited in scope as both sides attempted to keep the war regional versus allowing it to spill over into China or the broader world. Let's look at some of the Soviet and American aircraft of this time. First, the Lavochkin La-11, designated Fang by the American, long-range escort fighter. The Lavochkin 11 was produced post-World War II to provide an escort to the Soviet long-range bombers or to intercept American planes. It had a top speed of 420 miles per hour and a heavy armament of 3 23mm cannons. Its main combat use was in the Korean War as an interceptor. However, its slow rate of climb of less than 2,500 feet per minute meant that it performed poorly, as it was unable to intercept the high-flying B-29s. It was also obsolete in its escort role when faced with jet fighters. It wasn't a terrible design, just one made obsolete by the rise of the jet fighter. Over 1,100 were produced before production ended. The Soviets, like the other powers, knew the age of the propeller fighter had drawn to a close and were reverse engineering German engines and aircraft to try to make a viable jet fighter. The MiG-9 is a distinctive-looking aircraft with its 3 cannon barrels extending well past the nose. Introduced in 1947, the MiG-9 suffered from its underpowered BMW-derived engine that gave it a top speed of 566 miles per hour and its straight-wing design. It did have a robust armament of one 37mm cannon and 2 23mm cannons. The MiG-9FR received an upgraded RD-21 engine. In the end, about 550 aircraft were built. The F9F Panther was a naval jet fighter bomber with a straight wing. It had a top speed of 575 miles per hour and a ceiling of 44,000 feet with a range of 1,300 miles. It boasted a heavy armament of 4 20mm cannons and could carry up to 2,000 pounds of bombs. It was somewhat outclassed by the MiG-15, although in the hands of a capable pilot, it was more than able of holding its own and served throughout the Korean War as the Navy's primary fighter bomber. The Lockheed Martin F-80 Shooting Star. First built in 1943 using a copy of the de Havilland H-1 turbojet, the Shooting Star did not see any combat in World War II. It was used primarily as a fighter bomber in the Korean War, as it flew tens of thousands of sorties. It had a top speed of over 600 miles per hour and a range up to 825 miles and a ceiling of about 47,000 feet. It carried 6 50 caliber machine guns and up to 2,000 pounds of bombs and 8 rockets. Over 1,700 were produced. The MiG-15 is one of the iconic communist aircraft of the Cold War. It came as a nasty surprise to the West, as it was a significant improvement over its predecessor thanks to a sturdy airframe, swept wing design, and a copy of the Rolls-Royce Nene engine. With a top speed of 668 miles per hour and a ceiling of almost 51,000 feet. It was slightly faster and can go much higher than the F-86 Sabre. Since it was designed as an interceptor more than a dogfighter, this performance makes sense. It also had a heavier armament of one 32mm and two 23mm cannons. Cannons packed a bigger punch than the comparable American machine guns, but had a slower rate of fire and carried less ammunition. The MiG-15 could also use drop tanks or two conventional bombs. Rising to meet the MiG-15 was the F-86 Sabre. Made by North American, it would go on to be the dominant fighter of the Korean War. With a top speed of 650 miles per hour, a ceiling of more than 45,000 feet, it was both an escort fighter and an interceptor. While it had a lighter primary armament than the MiG-15, with 6 50 caliber machine guns, it boasted better maneuverability. It also could carry drop tanks, or up to 16 rockets or 2,000 pounds of bombs. Like the MiG-15, the Sabre had a sturdy airframe, with pilots managing to limp heavily damaged aircraft home at times. In the book Fighter by Ralph Leinberger, the MiG-15 is listed as a disappointment versus the F-86, but in the book MiG Alley by Thomas Cleaver, Cleaver contends that when flown by comparable pilots, the MiG-15 and F-86 Sabre were in the same class, with both aircraft enjoying certain advantages that could be nullified by an experienced opponent. Analysis of both aircraft's performance is clouded by several factors. First, the nature of the air war meant that the MiGs had a defensive advantage, as the Sabres had to fly long distances and keep a close eye on their fuel. The quality of air crews differed throughout the war, as many of the American and Russian pilots were seasoned combat veterans, while their Chinese and North Korean counterparts had to learn the trade, often the hard way. The Korean War was a wake-up call to the West that the Soviet Union could produce a good jet fighter and crew it with proficient pilots. The bombers of the Cold War were varied. The Tu-4 Bull was a clone copy of the American B-29 Superfortress, using an intern B-29 bomber in World War II. It was an airframe clone down to the last detail. However, it used Soviet electronics, engines, and weapons. The biggest performance decline was the range being limited to about 3,300 miles versus about 5,600 miles for the B-29. It had a top speed of 347 miles per hour, a ceiling of about 37,000 feet, and also a payload of about 13,000 pounds. Over 800 were produced before it was replaced by more advanced bombers. The original aircraft, the B-29, was a workhorse of the U.S. in the Pacific Theater War during World War II. It was pressed into service during the Korean War as well. With a top speed of 365 miles per hour and a ceiling of about 32,000 feet, it was very vulnerable to the MiG-15 and had to be escorted by Allied fighters. In the end, the rise of jet interceptors meant that it had to be switched over to nighttime bombing. In the end, the Allied air superiority in Korea was unable to win the war, but it did prevent the communists from taking all of Korea. The Korean War was a wake-up call to the U.S. Air Force that the Soviets and their allies could field both capable pilots and capable planes. The Korean War ended in 1953, but further storm clouds were gathering, and there will be more air battles over Asia and elsewhere in the near future. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe.